So you guys ready? Janice,
We
ready?
are.
Okay. Whenever you guys are ready.
Okay. The question I would like to pose to all of you today is, during COVID, what did society as a whole most have to adapt to? The answer, a virtual world. Whether you were in school, running a business, working for a company, we had to shift from face-to-face communication to a more virtual setting. And platforms like Google, Microsoft, Zoom, they took over the entire world to help people communicate in such hard times. Our company, Dropbox, tried to keep up in these COVID times, but they saw very stagnant growth. They focused more on their business-to-business model rather than their business-to-consumer model, and I feel that it put them behind, set them behind. So the question today is, how can we fix that? How can we keep up with our competitors? Their mission statement basically is to create a more enlightened way of working. So the goal today is to figure out how to maintain their values, but also increase their revenue and sales. Hi, I'm Krista Rakuba, and I'm here today with my colleagues,
Lauren Spallone,
Gavin Tice,
Jalen Gibson.
and as you can see, we are Team TOLTEC, and this is our QR code that you can scan to not only, you can learn more about us individually, and you can always save this to your phone and look at it later if you ever want to learn more about what we individually bring to our team. And now today I would like to pass it over to my colleague Lauren first to discuss Dropbox's business problem.
thank you, Kristen. So Dropbox needs to ask themselves this big question. They have stagnant growth currently, but what can they do to increase their revenue? Currently, Dropbox is more focused on a business-to-business model, and it is well established, which is why we believe that they need to switch to their business-to-consumer model. And our solution for this, for establishing a business-to-consumer model, is currently the main problem in Dropbox's plan is they offer a free trial and then they offer a premium subscription monthly at $10. That's a big gap. And it goes from the free version is 2 gigabytes, the premium version is 2 terabytes. So our plan is to establish 4 new subscriptions in between those so that when customers subscribe to our free subscription first, then they can move on to our next one, which is our next plan, and it just grows from there. But first, I'm going to talk about the company. Dropbox is an adaptable company. It is adaptable because when they realized that they were growing globally, they decided to establish offices in 11 countries. They also offer 15 plus languages, and the most important, cool thing that they offer is that when in each country the prices change because they want to adjust to each economy so that they thrive everywhere. They're also secure. It is so important for a file sharing cloud storage company to have security. And this is why they use the 256-bit advanced encryption standard. This is one of the most secure forms of encryption that they could use, which is why they are ranked as one of the most secure companies. They also have a great appeal to their audiences. It is shown through their over 700 million users, and their revenue in 2020 was 1.9 billion. Now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Gavin to talk about the competitors that we face.
Thank you, Lauren.
Mm-hmm.
So to understand where Dropbox stands as a product and as a service, we have to understand where Google Drive and Microsoft OneDrive, the 2 major competitors that we see in Dropbox's line of service, and where they succeed and where Dropbox hasn't. So to understand Dropbox's advantage, we constructed a comparison metric that analyzes the other competitors and finds where their products succeed and what factors Dropbox needs to use to make their line more marketable. So this is the competitive profile matrix that we as a team constructed. And while I won't go over every single number, I would like to highlight the importance of we found that customer loyalty and product quality are the highest weighted metrics needed for successful file sharing services. And while Dropbox does have what we believe to be the most effective product offering, especially when compared to OneDrive and Google Drive, their price competitiveness is their weakest point. As we earlier mentioned, they don't have the same affordability that OneDrive and Google Drive both offer. So to rectify this, we decided to create new plans that bridge that gap between the free trial and the premium subscriptions. We created a graphic to show that matrix. Now, the hidden opportunity below Dropbox is their 700 million active consumers that we earlier mentioned. While these are 700 million active users, only 16.9 million of them are paying. So the issue for Dropbox is not a lack of market size or a lack of active users, but rather that their users don't find a reason to subscribe to their plans. So we believe that the best solution for these plans is to add more attractive plans. Our beginning plan is a 50 gigabyte plan for 99 cents. This is an introductory plan that brings users into the Dropbox ecosystem. This is the advantage that OneDrive and Google Drive both seem to show. They have introductory plans priced at a similar point for a similar storage that brings users in, and then as they mature into new plans, you can then price them in for a more profitable subscription. So now we then offer 100 gigabytes for $1.59, then 200 gigabytes for $1.99, and then finally a 1 terabyte plan for $5.99. This adds on to the existing premium plan of 2 terabytes for $9.99. Now I'm going to hand it over to Jalen to look at not only these plans, but how they capture our existing user base and the potential revenue projections based on that capture.
Thank you, Gavin. So, obviously with 4 plans, we have to address what we expect our average revenue per individual person would be, since there's different price ranges for each plan. So, we found that from a sample of 20 people, if we were to allocate them to a certain number for each plan, that we would average $2.12 per person in revenue. And we expect that of our 700 million current consumers and the free consumers, that we'd capture about 10 to 15% of them in our new paid plans. So using that, we would expect about 148 million to 222 million in our first year after introducing the new plans earned from these free consumers going to our paid subscriptions. Now for outlook through the next 5 years, we'd expect both the average cost for per person due to upgrading in plans to larger storage, they use more storage, as well as a larger portion of our current market being introduced to the paid plans, that we would see about 476 million to 523 million by year 5. So here we just have a graphic showing how much would be made with the $2.12 average in our first year and how much market is captured. And we think that 10 to 15% is a realistic starting rate because we have such a loyal starting consumer base and because it's so inexpensive for our new plans. Here we have our year 5 calculations. Same thing showing if certain percentages of our current 700 million would be captured into our plans, how much we expect to make, and we think that 25 to 27.5% is a reasonable point to reach from our 10 to 15%, which is where we get the 476 million to 523 million. So we recognize also that with any change a business makes, there's costs associated with it. However, we will have a very low cost with this change because we already have established servers and Dropbox already is directing most of their operating expenses to development and research, meaning that this fits exactly into the scope of their current spending, and they already have the servers that will cater to their market going to the paid services. So they don't need to make new hardware, they don't need to make new servers, it will fit in what they already have functioning. Additionally, they have a hard drive that's an exabyte, which is 1,000,000 terabytes, and they've actually upgraded recently to a multi-exabyte hard drive, so they won't have any issue handling all the increased storage that will be demanded by all these new paid consumers that are going to the 200 gig, 1 terabyte storage compared to that 2 gigabyte free one. Additionally, right now Dropbox has a strong global presence worldwide, and they don't have a large influence in the lower consumer income base. And this is because Dropbox has found that they have had more success with countries and consumers that have higher GDP per capita. So by introducing these cheaper plans, they now are making themselves more available to lower income consumers without having to actually direct any resources to expanding towards those countries and those consumers. So by changing their operations to cater to their current customers, they are now opening themselves up to new customers without having to spend any in advertising or marketing. It will just come naturally. So, with the inexpensive nature of this change being implemented, as well as the large revenue increase that's expected from it, Dropbox can expect to accumulate large capital that then can be directed to their business-to-business segment as well as business-to-consumer. But they're very strong business-to-business right now, and we want to really capitalize on that as well. And this is just a great way to accumulate wealth for investing in that further. So they can continue to invest in their business-to-business model, which then can lead to them focusing now on more global expansion, where it's more planned global expansion rather than the customers that just come with finding the app and just coming across the service. I will now pass it on to Lauren to come full circle.
Okay. Along with the future steps. So after we're fully established in the business to customer, then we're going to establish in the business to business. And like I said previously, our business to business model is we already make our great amount of revenue from that. So with the business to customer, it's the ultimate combination. Now bringing it back to the question. The big question that I asked in the beginning is how are they going to increase their revenue? They've experienced stagnant growth. They haven't been able to compete, come on top over their competitors, especially with the COVID. And so one of the main things that we mentioned throughout our presentation is that our competitors' premium price was $10, our price was $10, but our competitors was only $2, which is why we decided to implement our four plans to fit in between our free model and our premium model. To refresh your knowledge, our first model free model would go from 2 gigabytes, and then it would go 50, 100, 200, and then 1 terabyte, 2 terabytes. By doing this, we will be able to overall capitalize on our business to consumer base, which is exactly what Dropbox needs to do. And the good thing about Dropbox is for their mission statement, they already have an enlightened way of working. Their product is reliable, they already have a good customer base, but that's what we need to expand with our 4 new plans. Now, I'm going to be passing it over to Kristen to wrap it up.
Thank you. So, to go back what I talked about at the beginning, I talked about COVID and how these other services skyrocketed. Everybody uses some sort of service to send emails or send files, send photos. But what Dropbox can do better is reach their consumer base, not just big businesses. That's what they were striving for in the beginning. But to keep up with current times and what has been happening in this world, it is important that they switch to more plans so that they can keep up with these competitors. And I would just like to say thank you for listening to our presentation. I hope that it was very knowledgeable for you to have a new look and aspect into the world of but file sharing services.
Thank you. So we could go ahead and start off with the 10-minute Q&A.
Oh yeah, we also have appendices. Just wanted to go through those real quick, get to the end.
Thank you. I wanted to just quickly, you mentioned stagnant growth.
Mm-hmm.
Could you show some numbers, like how do you arrived at that, and yeah, we'll start with that.
I think there is a graph of that. I don't know where exactly it is. Let me see if you could help me out for 1 second.
So
I feel like it's back more, right?
there's their paying customers. There's a graph of that.
It shows the growth of paid
Yeah.
customers.
Where am I looking for that?
It's actually one of the later appendixes.
Okay.
Back one.
Back one?
There you go.
There?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know where
You wanna
exactly it
take
was.
over this
Yeah, okay. So they haven't seen much growth in their business to consumer model, as we said. And while you can see that they had a decent increase from 6.5 to 8.8, that's pretty considerable in terms of percentage increase. But as they got to, and especially when they got over towards when COVID occurred, they were seeing very little increase in their consumers. And for a normal company in terms of general business, that growth wouldn't be a concern. But it was the fact that with COVID, everything was shifting to cloud and to file sharing stuff. So when you see normal growth, when we were one of the few companies that with anything with cloud sharing, one of the few companies that set for a great success in a sense during that time while other companies and businesses are struggling, when you don't see that increase, and especially Google Drive and OneDrive seeing major increases in their uses, it stands out that, okay, maybe it's not that, that's how the industry is growing, it's that we're not developing that way, because obviously everybody else is doing it, so why aren't we? Because before that, Dropbox kind of, it seemed as though, okay, it's just that, as companies get really big, their growth starts to slow and such.
Yeah.
But when everybody else doesn't have that issue, that kind of stands out.
And the market share, do you have some market share numbers so we can kind of see that their market share has decreased in the B2C?
So we definitely don't have the market share in the appendix, but with the case information I was provided, we found that OneDrive has a market share of around 18% of the file sharing service. I believe Google Drive was 32%, and there was Dropbox, squarely in the middle between these two competitors at 28% market share. And while that is considerable market share, that actually led to our initial question: how in post-COVID society, where virtualization of workplaces is the commonplace practice, that a service that is primarily and solely concerned with file transfer, not the largest file transfer service, where OneDrive is right behind and Google Drive is right ahead. And we found that it's the ecosystem. And what I mean by ecosystem, and I could give a presentation entirely on ecosystem, but what we found was that Google Drive is with every Google application. When you use Google, you will be able to use Google Drive. It is presented. When you use Microsoft Office 365, we imagine that most workplaces, a majority of workplaces, and I would love to have a number of this, use Office 365 in some capacity. OneDrive is shipped with that. So to subscribe to OneDrive or to subscribe to a Google Drive plan, that feels natural for most users because it's already presented. But Dropbox is simply file transfer, and they do it great. And we've shown that they do it very well, especially when compared to their competitors. But that's all they do. So our solution is, with that 28% market share, they don't need a larger slice of the pie. They need to improve on that slice that they have. They have those 700 million users, get more of those users paying. When you see from 2019 to 2020 that they've had growth, but not the growth you would expect. This should be unprecedented. In 2015 was their IPO. So that was our primary concern. Why was this growth not like OneDrive, not like Google Drive? And we believe that our 4 plans will help actually get that growth that we sorely missed out on.
So your plan is to compete on price. And my question is, how do you, the advantage of the B2B market is that you have longer relationships, right? Consumers have options, and obviously there's that big chunk of people that you haven't been able to get as customers, presumably because they're cheap.
Right.
So all Google Drive has to do is compete with you on price or make their offering free. How do you win their loyalty?
I can take it if you guys want.
Yeah, go, right, go.
So, so one of the things is that for Google Drive and OneDrive, and most cloud sharing services, they already have a free option. And So they can't really do, unless they just keep adding to storage to that, which eventually just does not become financially practical, they can't really compete with us in that department. And one of the main things, especially the case expressed this a lot, was how people don't like to switch once they commit to one. It becomes too annoying, and especially Dropbox is great to switch to. We're very, because of past business relationships and stuff with different companies we're now competing with, we have technology and like implementation that allows for easy switching to our service, but switching out of it is a little more difficult because it's not as easy for our competitors to bring stuff into them. So since we already have an established 700 million, it's difficult for them to leave us. So since we're capitalizing on our current customers and not trying to get more, we don't need to be too concerned about them leaving. Obviously, when you implement change like that, there's going to be some people who still go through the effort of changing. But in general, there's the preference to stay with the service you're using because you're not only are you accustomed with it, but also it's your stuff is in there. Like you have to go through a process of transferring it. So
what do I lose if I transfer?
It's more the difficulty of doing so. And
so I could continue on that actually specifically. Something that we didn't get to touch on in our presentation, but something that we looked at when we were considering the product quality for the sake of the CPM that was earlier displayed, is that because Dropbox is not part of the larger ecosystem like OneDrive and Google Drive is, they're operating system neutral and they are workplace neutral. So what I mean by that is that one of the main issues with OneDrive is compatibility between Mac systems, mobile devices, and Windows systems. OneDrive works excellently for Windows systems, but not as comfortably with the others. Google Drive, on the other hand, works great with Google applications, and in that case, it is a bit more operating system neutral. However, you are still tied to a Google environment, and if for one reason or another your company does not like to work with Google or simply can't work with Google, Google Drive is no longer an option. So because Dropbox is as neutral in the sense that it's not tied to Windows, it's not tied to Mac, it's not tied to Google, it's not tied to any particular browser, for the sense of the cost and the transfer, Google can make their drive cheaper. OneDrive can make their drive cheaper, but they have a vested interest in protecting their own ecosystem. Dropbox isn't. So for businesses and consumers that work with multiple operating systems or work with multiple workplaces that use different systems, Dropbox is the most neutral and flexible.
To build on that neutrality, I think it's a very interesting argument for Dropbox. So for B2C consumers, right, it's the networking and word of mouth type of effect that has driven customers into Dropbox, and a lot of times it was, something that they used at work, etc., right, or friends used, etc. Does neutrality appeal to new consumers who might be signing up for services because of the network effect? I guess my question is, what's the connection between the network and word of mouth and neutrality?
We found that neutrality as an aspect for new consumers, it essentially means there's very little change they have to do, even for their work files or for their most important media. Essentially, we found that the networking effect that allows Dropbox to grow between consumers on the B2C phase is that as long as Dropbox maintains that neutral approach, that OS independent approach, they'll be able to have new consumers that use any kind of computer system. It's actually one of the advantages we found for the B2B model as well, which we kept this very focused on the B2C, but that neutrality for new consumers means that as businesses or as employees at a business, there's no misgivings about choosing Dropbox. However, if they were to choose OneDrive, if they were to choose Google Drive, there's certain concessions that have to be made. To use OneDrive, you're working with a Microsoft system. To use Google Drive, you're working with a Google-based system or an Android operating system-based system. And that's another great part of Dropbox, and I really wish we got to cover that as well in time, is it's very mobile friendly. Now, a competitor that we didn't get to cover because we felt it was almost outside of scope was iCloud storage, which is often with iPhones and other Apple devices.
It works better. Like I found, because I'm a big Mac user, I have a bunch of Apple products. I loaded it onto my computer, and I found that it loaded much faster. It was much easier to use, because sometimes Macs can be a little faulty. Apple products can be a little faulty. But I found that it was very easy to use, because usually I'm switching stuff between OneDrive for school, and then I'm going into Google Drive to do this and that. I found that it was just very easy use to get into.
Dropbox-wise?
Yes,
Okay.
on my Mac.
So that by that neutrality, that's the primary aspect I think of neutrality, is that there's no concessions even with devices. It's infrastructure friendly. Existing Office infrastructure that uses, where they might have their front end often use Mac, where their back end uses Microsoft, they would find advantage using Dropbox over OneDrive, because that front to back end communication is now neutral. There's no translation of document. There's no file format issues, and I would say for the B2C market, as they use Dropbox at their workplace and they use Dropbox in their personal life, we believe that neutrality is where that killer strength comes from. If they use a Mac at home but a PC at work, there's no issue.
Okay, great.
So-
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.